So it's with great honor that I would like to bring up Chairman Omali Yeshitela Chairman.
Brothers and sisters, comrades, first of all, I'd like to express my appreciation to the organizers of this event that's happening here on today. Secondly, I'd like to express my appreciation to all of you who've come out and to those who are participating in this event via the internet, the live streaming that we're doing throughout this program. I'd like to say that African Liberation Day is an extremely important happening. This African Liberation Day is happening on the 50th anniversary of the founding of the Organization of African Unity. Many people consider that a real serious occurrence. But actually the founding of the Organization of African Unity on May 25th, 1963 was really an attack on the work that had been led up until that point, was led subsequent by Kwame Nkrumah to organize an all-African state, one single African state, one single African government. Nkrumah had been one of the most dynamic forces carrying the message of Marcus Garvey, who influenced him seriously, he admitted. In fact, that's why the shipping line in Ghana, once independent, was named Black Star, because of the influence by Marcus Garvey. And it was this work that Nkrumah was doing, warning African people everywhere that we would never be free unless Africa was united. Africa had to be united. Without a united Africa, there could be no united economy, no meaningful economic development, there could be no strategic approach to defense of Africa, there could be no actual defense of African people at all. And it was this work by Nkrumah all over the continent of Africa that terrified white power, the imperialists of that era. And Nkrumah had called together a number of conferences attempting to pull the independent African states into a single organization. He had already won unity with Sekou Touré in Guinea-Conakry. He had already won unity with Modibo Keita in Mali. He was engaging, had been engaged in work with Patrice Lumumba in Congo, and they had come to a secret agreement about uniting Congo and Ghana. This was the kind of work that Nkrumah was leading throughout the continent of Africa, to be independent, to be free. He said that all Africans should leave the so-called Commonwealth that was led by England, that we could create our own single economy as African people. And this was something that upset the imperialists. And so they used this conference. 32 so-called African independent states came together, and Nkrumah spoke on May 24th, the day before, continuing up the day before the actual consolidation of the Organization of African Unity, continuing to warn the African states that unless Africa was united, that there would be havoc to pay, a serious, horrible price that we would have to pay. He predicted that there would be wars fought among Africans around these borders, among other things, that we would be played one against the other by the imperialist powers. The United States in particular, but not only the United States, were working overtime to undermine this effort goal to pull together one single African state, one single African government. Liberia and Tubman there played a real serious role. They were the ones who talked about gradualism. Singhole, they didn't want to see this happen, partially because they wanted to protect their own little fiefdoms where they were located. The imperialists went on a serious media campaign that demonized Nkrumah, characterized him as somebody who simply wanted to be the president of all of Africa. That's why he was pushing this. Playing on the egos of the petty puppets that the imperialists themselves had put in power in most of these 32 different states. And they succeeded in preventing the consolidation of a single united Africa. And instead, what was put in place was this thing that they call the Organization of African Unity. And enshrined codified in the principles of the Organization of African Unity was respect for the colonial borders. This was in the charter of the Organization of African Unity, respect for the colonial borders. And you know, the borders in Africa today were borders that were created by white power. They sat down around a table in Berlin, Germany, 1884 and 85. And they shared out different parts of Africa to different imperialist forces. And they did this because for centuries they had been fighting over Africa in order to prevent this next war among white power over what part of Africa each was going to get. You know how even the best of mafioso deals fall apart when one gets a bit greedy or one feels like he didn't get what he should have got. And so in order to prevent this war from happening, a conference was called in Berlin, Germany, among the imperialist forces, and they began to divide Africa and share Africans out among each other. And all of these so-called African states that you see on the map, all of these so-called African countries that you see on the map, and many people even refer to them as different nations. These were creations of Europe and European imperialist white power, and it was an attack on the effort by Kwame Nkrumah to organize one Africa and one nation. This is something that you must understand. And the war against Nkrumah did not end on that day. In fact, 3 years after the founding of the Organization of African Unity, Nkrumah was overthrown with the leadership of U.S. imperialism and then white liberal imperialist President Lyndon Baines Johnson. They overthrew Nkrumah, and because of his vision for a free and prosperous Africa with the resources of Africa going to benefit Africa and African people. And now they left in place this thing called the Organization of African Unity that many people still celebrate today, but it was something that actually was an attack on the struggle to build one Africa, one nation. So we are here today because that work is unfinished. And it is important to be here today because that work is unfinished, and it is important to use African Liberation Day as a means to further that work. Because although the Organization of African Unity was an imperialist-inspired creation, it was at this May 25th, 1963 event that it was declared that this would be African Liberation Day, commemorating the founding of the Organization of African Unity. So we take this date of May 25th, and we embrace this date of May 25th because it reminds us of the work that has to be done, because Africa is not free. Africa suffers mightily, but it suffers in a changing world. And I think it's important for us to say that when we talk about the liberation of Africa and a changing world, we're not talking about an Africa in a vacuum. There's something that's happening in the world, and we must contextualize the struggle to liberate and unify Africa and the struggle to free ourselves. We must talk about what is happening in the world today that influences what it is that we are trying to do in this meeting and in all the work that we should be involved in. First of all, I want to say that my objective here And the objective of the African People's Socialist Party in sponsoring African Liberation Day is to win active participation in the revolution to free African people. That we don't believe in just doing events for events' sake. That we're not involved in simply having events, that we want to organize our people. We have to organize our people to make a revolution so that we can free ourselves, we can free our continent, and the resources that are the birthright of black people all around the world can be recaptured and put in our own hands. That's why we're here. That's what this is about. That's what Nkrumah was about. That's what Marcus Garvey was about. Not holding events, but winning freedom. Yes. And unfortunately, since the defeat of the Black Revolution of the 60s, and you know that revolution was defeated. When I talk about a defeated revolution, I'm not simply talking about what happened to the Black Panther Party. I'm talking about what happened to us around the world. I'm talking about the murder of Patrice Lumumba. I'm talking about the overthrow of Kwame Nkrumah. I'm talking about the capture and murder of Che Guevara in Bolivia. I'm talking about a revolution that had defined the trajectory of human history at one point, and it was stalled and pushed back by U.S. imperialism, by murder, and by the arrest and imprisonment of thousands of our people here and around the world. That's what we are about completing today. And that revolution was crushed. And the bodies were living all around the world. And what was this revolution about? This was not a revolution to oppress anybody. It was a revolution to end the oppression of everybody. That's what it was about. It was a revolution so that our children could know a future, because in this world that we live in today, half the people on earth live off less than $2.75 US cents a day. Half the people on the planet Earth live off less than $2.75. In this world that we live in today, at this time, we're talking about a situation where 80% of the people on the planet Earth try to survive off $10 or less a day. That is not acceptable. It is not acceptable to me, it's not acceptable to you, and it's not acceptable to anybody. And of course, what we are told is that this is not a consequence of a social system that was born in slavery, wasn't it? Born of slavery, born of genocide. We are told that it is the ineptitude of the non-white people of the world that's responsible for this great disparity in wealth and resources that exist today. We're saying that we don't suffer because we are inept. We're not impoverished because we are inept. The people who work all day on the continent of Africa, all day just for a single meal, are not doing it because we are inept. We are doing it because a social system was born at our expense. That's why that is happening. What am I talking about? I'm talking about today. We have a situation where capitalism shakily continues to dominate the world. It is a world economy, this thing capitalism. It is an economy, a whole social system that was born on slavery. You know that. This is a question that has dumbfounded, confounded many of us growing up as a child. I had to ask myself why I was everywhere I looked in the world. I could see that people who looked like me were poor, were steeped in ignorance, and had brutality imposed on us on the one hand, violence imposed on us on the one hand, and everywhere I looked, people who were white were doing all right. People who were white were well off, but we were doing poorly. And of course, the explanation we always got for that was that white people did well as compared to us because white people were more civilized than we are. You've heard it before. Or if not, that is because white people are thrifty and we are not thrifty. We waste all of our money, etc. This is the simple-minded kind of explanation that was imposed on us. Of course, I don't know too many people who believe it, except those people who Malcolm X characterized as house Negroes. But it didn't matter whether you believed it or not because they had all the guns, didn't they? You can be convinced of almost anything if somebody's standing over you with a gun, willing to use it and brutalize you all the time. short years between 1347 and 1351, half the white people on earth died. Did you know that? They died of plague. They call it the Black Plague. At least half of all the white people on planet Earth died in 4 years. And then even after that time frame, there were that and other plagues continued to sweep Europe, wiping them out. You cannot lose half of a population and have anything that approximates a viable economic life. You lose half of the people in 4 years, you don't have an economy. So how did Europe rescue itself from this state of terrible poverty and this state of affairs where people were dying like flies? I said that people were dying like flies, everything was dying. Horses were dying, cows were dying, literally dogs were dying all over Europe. In fact, the Pope, who was supposed to have this special relationship with God, was so frightened by what happened is that he got out of town. He literally left and went into the countryside running from the plague. Many so-called Christians of the moment believed that they were dying like this because God was visiting a special kind of terror against them because they had sinned so mightily. Christian sects were developed where people actually got involved in self-flagellation. Hundreds of them would be marching throughout Europe, recruiting more, beating themselves with chains and things like that to try to preempt God. So maybe if I hurt myself bad enough, God won't get me. This is the terror of the plague. And yet, what are we told? That explains how Europe got to be what it is as compared to the rest of us. We told that Europe, white people left Europe because they had an adventurous streak, that they had a curiosity itch that had to be scratched. They wanted to find out if the world was really flat or not. We told that they had a nutmeg shortage and they were looking for spices. Only thing I can say, that must have been an extremely impoverished Europe to hop in a ship, several ships. That must have been an extremely desperate Europe to not know if the world was flat and you might sail off if you sail far enough. I don't know how many spices you need that badly that you would take those chances. But it was an impoverished Europe, and in this myth, in this fairy tale they tell, is hidden the reality that Europe was impoverished. It was starving Europe that got them on those ships, that had them sailing around the world and brutalizing, murdering people and capturing their lands and capturing our resources. This is the beginning of the process that the people in Afghanistan are trying to overturn today. This is the beginning of the process that Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales and the people in South America are trying to overturn today. This is the beginning of the process that gave birth to the American Indian movement, to the Black Panther Party, to Marcus Garvey, and to revolutionary activity around the world. This is the beginning of that process that enriched Europe at the expense of everybody else on the planet Earth. This is how Europe escaped poverty and death that was imposed on them at our expense. But we are told that Europe had a surplus of civilization and Christianity that they just had to share with the rest of us. That's why they left Europe. We are told, in fact, I think it was the poet from England, Rudyard Kipling, who declared that their running out to colonize the world was just something that the white man was burdened to do. Having this surplus of civilization and Christianity, just had to go out and share it with everybody, we are told. They called it the white man's burden. Have you ever heard of that before? The white man's burden. So they were coming to help us. You should know that. They were coming to help us when they came here to this land that we occupy on today. They were coming to help, to bring Christianity. In fact, the Pope blessed it all. Split the world for enslavement between Spain and Portugal. You have this part and you can have that part. They've been splitting the world since then among themselves, occupying the world themselves against the will and interest and aspiration and happiness and future of everybody else. That's what's been going on. Karl Marx, who some white folks used to love, offered an explanation also about how this thing that they call capitalism that Barack Hussein Obama is involved in now, using all means to try and protect and defend. He talked about capitalism having as a major impetus the rape of Africa. He called it turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. Because you got to ask the question, how did capitalism get here? Was it something that Jesus dropped off from Calvary? How did capitalism get here? Is there really a Santa Claus that brings to all the good, meaning white people, goodies and misery to the rest of us? How did capitalism get here? And Marx was able to say that he called this thing primitive accumulation of capital, because he's speaking from the perspective of somebody who, a society that has benefited from capitalism. And because he was able to say that capitalism was progressive in the development of human society. And he said that it was turning Africa into a warren for the commercial hunting of black skins. It was taking the so-called Indians in the Americas and putting them in the mines, bringing up gold and silver that went into Europe. It was the Opium War fought by England. You know what I'm talking about, old proper tea-sipping England against the Chinese, because they wanted China to take opium from them and they would take Chinese tea, but the China didn't want to trade with them, didn't want their opium. But England then, what did it do? Did it say, okay, you don't want to trade, maybe if you don't want opium, we make a pretty good clock that we'd like to trade with you? No, they initiated the war, the so-called Opium War. 1841-42, England launched a war against China to force China to become a nation of junkies, drug addicts for the tea. England is known for its tea sipping. You know that, don't you? But you all, England is not known for having tea leaf trees. They don't produce tea trees or tea leaves in England. They fought and forced China to do that. And so you had developing here this thing that Karl Marx called the primitive accumulation of capital. And critical, fundamental to this whole production was Africa and what they characterized as a slave trade. The war that was launched on Africa that's responsible for our being here. The war that was launched on Africa that's responsible for our being here. The war that was launched on Africa that is responsible for many of us not knowing what our names are. The war that was launched on Africa that's responsible for the assault on belief systems that held us together. The war that was made on Africa that's responsible for the tremendous transfer of wealth and resources from Africa to the white world. This was part of what they were talking about when Marx talked about the primitive accumulation of capital that made capitalism possible. This was the fundamental component that went into the development of the capitalist social system itself. In the beginning, you have a starving, impoverished, and unfree Europe. You know there was no freedom in Europe. They taught you that when you went to elementary school. Among the lies they told you that they said when Europeans came to America, they were looking for what they called freedom of religion. Isn't that what they said? They were looking for, they had no freedom. There had no freedom there. In fact, the state of Georgia in this country was founded as a prison colony by England. Australia was stolen and taken from and then they launched this war, but you cannot find evidence of a jail or a prison in the indigenous population here or in Africa before the white man came. No evidence of a jail or a prison here or in Africa before Europeans attacked us. I hate people who lie on white people. It's absolutely unnecessary. Ain't that right? Just tell the truth. Just tell the truth. This is how Europe and America got strong and powerful, and the rest of us lost our resources and lost every damn thing we had. So this is what we're looking at in the 1960s. Kwame Nkrumah was a blazing torch of fighting to bring Africa back together again so that we can control our own resources. But you know Marcus Garvey was there even before that, wasn't he? You know Garvey, and I love Marcus Garvey, and most people who give Garvey a bad name are so-called Garveyites, unfortunately. Because they try to take Garvey out of history. They want to make Garvey some kind of god or some kind of, prophet or way up there that you pray to on August 8th, 17th. Every year you pull him out and you go and pray to him, and then after on the 8th and the 19th, the 18th, you push him back in the closet and just go about your way. But Garvey was one of the most important anti-imperialist forces in the world. Garvey was a part of a movement of oppressed people around the world who were trying to overturn this relationship that all of us have with imperialism. Hell, the Vietnamese fought. For more than 100 years, France held Vietnam as a drug colony, doing the same thing in Vietnam that England was doing to China. You can't ignore the fact that everybody was catching hell under this demonic social system that had been imposed on them. You can ignore that at your peril. It'll not allow you to know who your friends and allies objectively are. Objectively, sometimes your friends and allies don't know that you're objectively on the same side. You have to educate them too. They're no different from the rest of us who've been duped into believing, as Malcolm would say, that your friends are your enemies and your enemies are your friends, right? So, we've been stuck for a long time with this kind of social system. Garvey was one of those who was an anti-imperialist, and people like to talk about what Garvey did, and I think that's appropriate, but at the same time, Garvey was struggling. Garvey, Ho Chi Minh used to attend meetings. Liberty Hall, right in New York, Ho Chi Minh, who led the struggle to free Vietnam, attended meetings, Garvey meetings at Liberty Hall. You know that Garvey was a contemporary of people like Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata, and people who were leading struggle in El Salvador at the time. Garvey and Sun Yat-sen from China. Garvey was a contemporary with all these forces who were fighting to overturn imperialism. So he wasn't some magic person. He was who we are supposed to be. And he had created also fundamentally significant a single organization to lead African people to freedom. A single organization. Because he recognized that wherever we were, we had to have a strategic struggle. You had to unite our struggle to deal with every aspect wherever we were located. That's why the African People's Socialist Party, as I'm standing here talking to you today, we are preparing for African Liberation Day that will be happening on June 2nd in Paris, France. And in June 2nd, Africans will come from all over Europe because we are organized in Germany, in several cities in Germany. Marcus was standing here. He tell you he was born in Congo, but he's been working in Germany for the longest period of time. We are organized in Belgium. We are in France. We're in several cities in Germany. We are organized right now in Sweden. You see the rebellion that's going on in Stockholm, Sweden right now, don't you? We are organizing right there. Listen to Uhuru Radio. at least by next Sunday, perhaps even on tomorrow, there's a possibility you will begin to hear reports directly from what's happening in Stockholm, because we are there organizing in the African community. Hold your hand, Canada. We're organizing in Canada. We're organizing right now in Kenya. We're organizing in Sierra Leone. In just a few days, some of the people in this room will be traveling to Kenya, where we are conducting a national conference, not Kenya, but Sierra Leone. And we've been organized there for a number of years. We're organizing in South Africa. We even have an organizer in Cairo. God told us that we have to have a single organization that can lead our struggle on every front. Our community pretended that somehow you can get all the so-called leaders together, and then once the leaders together, you can sort of unite Africa. It doesn't work that way. Somehow you can get the governments together, and once you get the governments together, you can unite Africa. It cannot work that way. And it can't work that way for a number of reasons. And primary or fundamental reasons, because Nkrumah warned us. He said that neo-colonialism was a thing that we were confronted with. And what is neo-colonialism? Neo-colonialism is white power in blackface, where you have a situation where independence is proclaimed by the colonizer. White man is going to lead. They even have ceremonies and situations where at 12:01 midnight, they will take down the oppressor's flag and raise up a so-called freedom flag. That's why many people call it flag independence. Raise it up, have a great ceremony, blow horns and beat drums and dance. And you see the ship going off to the sea. But what you don't see is the fact that even though they appear to have left, they still own the economy of Africa. Everything, everything. And I'm not talking about something that happened a long time ago. I'm talking about something that happened with people who you love and respect, like Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress, who've been sellouts since its inception. Where today you go to South Africa, you will find that white people, who now may represent 9% of the population, own 87% of the land in South Africa. White people in South Africa own more and control more land than exists in England and Northern Ireland combined. And it's supposed to be free and independent. You wonder why the African National Congress will shoot down more than 30 miners who are simply demanding better wages on their own land. Because you got white power in blackface in South Africa. They used to call it what? The Union of South Africa? The USA? And you got white power in blackface in this country. You don't need white power in blackface until the system is in trouble. It's when the Africans rise up and start saying, kill the white man. It's when the people rise up and say, kill the white eyes. Then it becomes necessary for them to bring in somebody who looks just like those who are fighting against them. And it confused people. You had Rashid Bey up here a moment ago. I love Rashid Bey because he doesn't know it, but what he does is always remind me that there, deep inside of us, Africa continues to exist. The stories of our oppression, the stories that we were once a free people, the realization that we will never be satisfied until we re-achieve that freedom. That's what I like about Rashid Bey when he comes up and he does his poetry, you see. So I think it's important for us to understand this neo-colonialist attack that's been waged against us in various places of the world in an attempt to try to protect the system where people have risen up and people have got wise. Neo-colonialism existed in Vietnam, didn't it? They had their old puppets there, the Vietnamese people rose up and crushed them. Neo-colonialism existed in Cuba. Y'all remember, what was his name? Batista, wasn't it? Neo-colonialism existed in Iran. The Shah was put there after they overthrew Mohammed Mossadegh in the 1950s. They put this neo-colonial puppet in place, right? That's what they do all around the world. Those are the good Negroes they put in place. That's why America's sweeping the earth now looking for good Muslims, you understand? Let's find some good Muslims, so somebody who will denounce and the rest of the Muslims who are out there talking about kill the white man. They need Negroes like that. But it's a statement of some significance. If you think about this, who would have said that 10 years ago that a Negro, 6 years ago, a Negro would be the President of the United States of America? It goes against the grain. It goes against everything. It goes against the philosophy, the ideology of imperialism. It's a statement about just how far they had to dig, how deep they had to dig in a struggle to try to rescue a social system that's on rocky ground. It's on rocky ground. There's everywhere you look in the world today, you see economic crisis, don't you? Look at what you see happening in Greece. Look at what you see happening in Italy, France, Ireland, all over the white world. You see people rising up, fighting against what's happening to them. Why are they rising up? Why is there economic crisis? Why is there economic crisis in this country? There's economic crisis. They say, well, this is because of the housing bubble burst. No, what burst is this illusion. Yeah. It's an illusion that's burst. It's the illusion that the rest of the world were dependents. We are dependent countries. We are dependent. No, what's dependent is white power is dependent on being able to continue to steal our resources. And what has been happening, especially since the Second Imperialist World War, you know the one they call World War II, you know the one they sometimes refer to as the last good war that America has fought? Well, that war, just like every one that has had, has been a war to redivide the world. That war that was fought against Hitler, who they said they were fighting Hitler because he was such a despot, he was such a person who was, they even said he was crazy, right? Who was against freedom, etc. Here is a war that's been fought in Germany at the time when lynching was a national pastime in this country. It's a war that was being fought in Germany at a time when lynching black people was the national pastime, surpassing baseball and the rest of their other harmless games that they were engaged in. And so they're going to fight a war for democracy. You believe that, don't you? It was a war that they had to fight, that they even had the army segregated. A war for democracy. Yeah. No, it was a war to redivide the world. And who was going to get this part of Africa? Who was going to get this part of Asia, etc. And of course, out of that war, the U.S. emerged as the supreme power on earth. Biggest economy, strongest economy, Europe devastated by war. The U.S. had dropped 2 atomic bombs on Japan. You talk about terrorism. They didn't drop bombs on people who were fighting wars. These were bombs dropped on cities where babies and civilians were slaughtered. No, they can never tell me anything about a so-called war against terrorism. If the United States were engaged in a war against terrorism, it had to commit suicide. Yes. It had to commit suicide. And so the people have been rising up, taking back their resources. People all over South America. You know that one time, they took so much silver out of the mines of Peru that they almost destroyed the economy of Spain. It was because the economy of Spain was based on silver. They brought so much silver and dumped it into the economy and almost wiped the economy out. This is how Europe got welfare. This is how Europe rescued itself after the so-called Black Plague. This was not that Europe had freedom. Europeans lived under what they call feudalism. You know what feudalism was, don't you? For 1,000 years, white people lived under feudalism in Europe. This is the time that created the myth of Robin Hood. You know, robbing from the rich to give to the poor, where the sheriff dominated everything, stealing taxes and everything the poor had, where the people were tied to the land, where they didn't live. Listen, people were so poor, and this is the literal truth. I don't believe in lying on white people. People were so poor that in some instances, people literally went naked because they had nothing to wear in Europe. And for 1,000 years, Europe struggled under feudal domination, where the lords, nobility dominated everything, owned everything. Let's go. Man's home is his castle now, but the only castles that were around where the nobility was located there. And somebody was tied to the land, and even though they couldn't be sold into slavery like what happened to us, if the land was sold, they went with the land to the next owner. This was feudalism in Europe. There's no freedom. What freedom? How did white people gain freedom? How did white people, ordinary white people, get property? They came to places like this. Europeans are not indigenous to these lands, whether in Canada or Australia or this land that they call the United States of America. The people who are indigenous to this land, those who are surviving, are living today in concentration camps that they call Indian reservations. This is the America that Barack Hussein Obama is talking about protecting. You understand? This is the reality that we're up against, that we're contending with now. But it's a system in severe distress. Severe distress everywhere. So much distress that people, you open the newspaper, go on the internet, turn on television, and there's war, struggle everywhere on earth. There's no peace. And there should be no peace as long as people are oppressed. Should be no peace. Should be no peace. I know there's a white left that walks around talking about peace, peace, peace. We organized an entity called the Black is Back Coalition for Social Justice, Peace, and Reparations. Now that's the combination we can deal with. Yes. There should be no peace without social justice. There will be no peace without social justice. And there damn sure won't be any peace unless we get some reparations. But we understand that reparations and the demand for reparations is a function of revolution. Because it doesn't matter what's in the Constitution, what's written on a piece of paper. If what was written on a piece of paper would matter, then the Indians would still be in possession of this land. How many times they signed a treaty with the indigenous people and then change their mind the next day? How many more civil rights bills do you think they're going to come up with for you now? So, I want to welcome everybody here today because we got a lot of unfinished work to complete. Africa has to be free. We are African people, you know that. I didn't say and African people, and we are Africans. That we are part of a nation that has been dispersed against our will around the world. We are the only ones who did not come here looking for a better way of life. We lost a better way of life as a part of the process of getting us here. That's something that we should, that's what my loyalty is. My loyalty is to Africa. I saw an FBI agent on TV just the other day. The Negro that they put to be the face for the attack on Assata Shakur. That this public attack on Assata Shakur with a Negro Attorney General and a Negro president in place. And the attack on Assata Shakur is an attack on the whole history of the struggle of African people. It's negation of the legitimacy of the struggle for people, black people, for having our freedom. It would take a Negro to do that. It would take a Negro president to say that she is the first so-called domestic terrorist in this country, a female domestic terrorist. No, the first domestic terrorist in this country was the cracker who got off a boat and started killing Indians and then came and snatched us and put us here. And they haven't even apologized for that. And until they get an apology, we need 2, 3, many Assatas Shakurs. And people are saying, well, you know, it is the law. Hell, slavery was the law. Slavery was legal. If you tried to get away from slavery, you broke the law. They put Nat Turner on trial before they killed him. How could the law be anything other than that? Those of us who have any understanding of political economy, understand our society itself, understand that the economy is the base of society, isn't it? This economy is the base of society. And upon this base, depending on what kind of economy you have, there emerges a superstructure. Isn't that right? And the superstructure is the legal system, the philosophy, even religion and what have you, reflects the superstructure. It reflects the base of that society. So terrorism, then, coming out of that society will be anything that attacks and undermines that society. You will be a terrorist. That's why the Ku Klux Klan has never been characterized as a terrorist organization. You ever hear them say the Klan is a terrorist organization? They say a terrorist organization, according to Barack Hussein Obama and Holder, is one that they got a list. They write down who is the terrorist. And they say that if you have anything to do or support a so-called terrorist, they can put you in jail. That means if you say, I free Assata Shakur, that means you're abating terrorism. That means they can have the whole African community locked up. That's why everybody got to say, free Assata, hands off of Assata Shakur. Everybody got to say it. And Holder, I want you to come yourself to get me. Free Assata now. Free Assata. Free Assata. Free Assata. Yeah. So, it's a serious situation. I just want to say a couple of other things to you. Because I'm clearly off script. But I want to say that it's really important for us to recognize that the 1960s was an incredible historical moment. I'm saying this not out of some kind of nostalgia, because the Chinese, I think, said it best. They said that it was a time where there was great disorder under the heavens, where revolution was the main trend in the entire world, where everybody was trying to win their freedom. And the imperialists succeeded in crushing that revolutionary movement. They, after the Nicaraguans won it, and of course Nicaragua happened so soon after Iran. And Iran was a real problem for them, because Iran, along with the white nationalist settler state of Israel that sits on occupied Palestine, then Iran, boom, Iran was functioning as the extended military force, the base of operation for U.S. imperialism. It was to protect the oil industry along with Europe. And what made Iran, along with Israel, and what made Iran and Israel significant is you got Arabs in this area where much of the oil, most of the oil is located. And Israel, a bunch of white people, some from Milwaukee and others from Russia and other places, because Golda Meir, the school teacher, was from Milwaukee, who became president of Israel. Said God gave it to him 2,000 years ago. And I guess, that's a hell of a real estate agent, And so the white people there who have no relationship to the Arabs and are hostile because they're interlopers who have stolen their land, etc. They can be trusted. And then you got in Iran, the Iranians are not Arabs either. They're Persians. So they felt like they could trust these guns and weapons with the white people in occupied Palestine that they call Israel, and with the Persians in Iran. These were the thugs who were going to keep the oil and resources safe for white power. And of course, what happened in Iran, as you know, is that they overthrew the Shah there, and they took, not only did they take the freedom, but they took all the guns and airplanes and everything else the U.S. had given to the Shah in order to protect their interests. And then, of course, you had the situation that it's been a part of a changing landscape in the world. This has been going on for a while, since the Second Imperialist War. And now it has reached a certain kind of crescendo, where you can't look any place without seeing the people fighting to take back their resources. Except what you see as an imperialism in trouble, and how does it attempt to rescue itself? Well, right now, a major thrust is being made against Africa. You see that Canada has an Africa plan, America has an Africa plan, France has an Africa plan, England has an Africa plan, China has an Africa plan, India has an Africa plan. You've got all of the imperialists that are in trouble scrambling to try and rescue themselves by digging deeper into the continent of Africa. All of the new hustlers on the block, China, India, etc., going into Africa to try and build themselves. And of course, you got the neo-colonial puppets. They don't give a damn if it's Chinese, Indian, France, or America, as long as they can get their cut. Right? And I'm talking about on the continent of Africa itself. You've got these puppet so-called leaders that don't represent Africa and African people. That's why the African People's Socialist Party and the African Socialist International, we have an Africa plan too. And this Africa plan means that we have to make revolution, that we have to put down on the ground, every place Africans are located on the planet Earth, revolutionary organization with the objective of taking power. Taking power! Everywhere we are. We're not talking about getting along with neo-colonial puppet regimes. We're talking about we have to organize and train people to put them in place. We have to prepare to govern. We have to prepare to govern. We have to prepare to govern if we are serious. If we're not talking about power, we're just talking about having another event. I'm tired of simply going to events. So, that's what we are working for. That's what Nkrumah was working for. That's what Garvey was working for. And that's why we built the African Socialist International. And a major thrust we're involved in now is the economic front, the Black Star Industries. And Black Star Industries is a beginning. It is a non-capitalist, anti-colonialist economic piece of work that we have initiated. We exist in this country. We are licensed to do business in Europe. We are in the process. I left Ghana 2 days ago, where we are looking at some land. And you should be interested in this, perhaps, because part of what we're trying to do in Ghana, just as Garvey, we're looking at some land where we can actually establish an African community, a prototype, based on African Socialist, African Internationalist principles, based on that we want to model based on what we need, where we can actually have production going on in that community, that can be solar and wind powered in terms of energy and the rest of it, that can be integrated into that African community in Ghana and build a real revolutionary base that's there. It's not the answer to anything, but it can be a prototype. It can show what is capable, what we are capable of doing. And we want to attract Africans from throughout the African world to come in and participate in that project, in that process. We are talking about the Black Star Industries. All of the economic work that we do is now, not all of it, because as you heard, we do other kinds of economic work. We created a number of nonprofits. Like in Sierra Leone right now, we do work. Is there on the program a discussion around the work we're doing in Sierra Leone? We do amazingly important work in Sierra Leone right now. But we also have created, like, the Burning Spear newspaper, Burning Spear, the Uhuru radio station, Uhuru Foods, and other projects that we have created. All of these fall under Black Star Industries. This is an economic front of our work. This is an incipient attempt. This is an attempt to build a national economy for African people. As China and everybody else is moving throughout Africa, and China is the fastest growing economic force on the continent of Africa today. You cannot go anywhere in Africa that you do not see Chinese. Everywhere in Africa. And the thing is that the people who are doing best in Africa are people who are not of Africa. Do you understand what I just said? Right now, the most successful economic forces in Africa are not people of Africa. There are other peoples who have come to Africa and who are involved in a process that goes from gentrification, driving up land prices and everything, whether it was starving and desperate people, losing land rights and resources, mines, you know, the totality. So we have to build an economic front. If you're serious about freedom, this is what Garvey understood. You got to have an economic front. Black Star Industries represents our move in that direction. It's a small move at this juncture. It's small because the numbers of people who are aware of it, who've been brought into the process, are small. But all of us are going to have to participate in supporting Black Star Industries. Up to now, what we've done is create a situation where some businesses will be created here, throughout Europe, in Africa, where depending on the business, the people or individuals who create the business can own up to 49%. The party, Black Star Industries, will own at least 51% of everything. We will provide training. We will provide other kinds of expertise to help the business succeed. But the thing is that it is not about simply letting individuals make a lot of money. It is about trying to develop a national economy, and the only reason we even have a 49% stake that somebody can have is because it functions as an incentive for some people who want to engage in developing our own economic life. But I'm one who's willing to invest in our future, invest in an independent economy for Africa with my own dollars, my own resources, and everybody is going to have to be able to do that if Africa is and African people are to ever know freedom. That's what it's going to take. White folks got a free ride. They got stolen land. They got stolen labor. We ain't got none of that and don't want any of that. And our incentive has to be a recognition that we are part of a dispersed nation, that the only way we will ever know freedom again is that we must take back our freedom, take back our resources, take back our land, and we have to do everything that's within our power to contribute to that effort. So we have the ability now, and there's going to be discussion in this meeting about Black Star Industries, where much more will be shown to you about what it is that we're doing and trying to do. And you're going to be called on, just like I'm calling on you to join this party. Join this movement. Let's get away from just going to events for events' sake. Let's get away from simply being consumers of information and join in this incredibly significant historical trajectory that peoples around the world are engaged in overturning the relationship that we have with white power and imperialism. Imperialism as we know it is dead. It doesn't mean that imperialism is dead. It means imperialism as we know it. And part of the crisis of capitalism, the crisis of imperialism, part of it is the crisis of white people losing power in a state of decline. The whole white world is in a state of decline. That includes this country as well. That's why Barack Hussein Obama is their mouthpiece today. But even as white power is losing, it's losing to what? It's losing to people in Afghanistan. It's losing to people all over South America that you could see in people like Hugo Chavez and Evo Morales in Bolivia. It's losing in those places, but it's also losing in contest with hungrier capitalist forces that are emerging, like China and India. This becomes a part of the crisis of imperialism. So just because white power is dying out, just because imperialism as we know it is dying, that doesn't mean we are winning. In order for us to win, we must be organized and committed to changing this relationship we have with imperialism. I want to say this, and then I shall move. I've been told that and you're right, I've talked too long. I want to say this, that when we say organize, we are not talking about joining the NAACP. If you want to join it, that's your affair. Go do it. You know, you're in the wrong joint right now. We're not talking about just the situation that has come subsequent to the defeat of this revolution. We've got a place where people just get used to going to events. They black because they defend the Jenna this. They black because they defend Mumia. They black because they do such and such a thing. They black because they like this on Facebook. Etc. We got a lot of what do you call it, social media militants and the rest of it that substitutes for revolutionary activity. We need revolutionaries. We need professional revolutionaries. We need people who are willing to make the sacrifices and who have the kind of discipline that it takes to win freedom. This is not a party that we are talking about. This is talking about overturning, by intervening in history and taking and seizing this history so that it serves us as a people, so that Africa can become our possession again, so that the birthrights of our children can come into our possession. That's a whole different story. And we don't mind observers, and there are a lot of people who like to sit around and watch history go by. But what we are most interested in is people who want to make history, and that's a whole different thing. Part of that means that you got to relearn the way you think and understand everything, because the truth of the matter is we don't know nothing. The party has worked for 40 years now, developing our theory, developing organization, developing our political line, and you're invited to come in, join this process, and then we can do something to change the way the world is and to guarantee that Africa and African people have a future. I thank you so much for your patience. I want to say all power to the people. Ease were laid to. E Africa. Ease were laid to. E Africa. One Africa. One Africa. One nation. Uhuru.